I'm going to give you a big hug next time I see you, Jim. So you just better look out.
I think I can run faster scared than.
Hello and welcome back to the Building HVAC Science Podcast, where we're here to help create better, more knowledgeable HVAC and building performance technicians by helping the two professions better understand each other with the ultimate goal of making customers happy in the homes they live in and the buildings they work in. This episode, today, Eric and I bring on board our friend Jim Bergmann as our special guest. This all came about because I saw Jim recently at the office and he showed me some recent updates to measureQuick. I'm like, dang, that's cool. You keep on evolving this product and listening to your end users. What an awesome thing to do as a product developer and an awesome thing to share. So I wanted to share it on this podcast. Jim talks about the initial journey of measureQuick. Maybe you've heard it before. If you haven't, I think it's worthwhile listening to see where he came from to develop this product. It's really been his life's passion. He is really peaking right now with this product and everything he has done in his life up to now. He talks about the importance of setting measurement targets and using data trends and using smart tools. This is sort of where it all comes together. And it really is totally unique from what I've seen on the market. Also, he touches on the challenges of balancing the needs for different user groups. And that's what really made this host of changes that has come about now, launching at the end of July, because he has to serve both utility programs, energy auditing, and field technicians and the different types of needs they have for their data and the data integrity. Jim also talks a lot about the last year in his life, which he describes his personal journey. And I think it's something important to listen to understand where this guy's been through and where he's going and how he is so devoted to helping out HVAC technicians. I'll let you listen to the episode and glean all those details from that. And we really appreciate the listeners out there who engage with Building HVAC Science. And we look forward to bringing more episodes like this to you. So here's Jim Bergmann talking about smart tools and smarter tech. Jim Bergmann's measureQuick evolution.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Welcome back to the Building HVAC Science Podcast. Eric Kaiser here, Bill Spohn over there, and with us today, special guest, Mr. Jim Bergmann. If you haven't heard of Jim before, well, he's just Jim. So, Jim, welcome.
Hey, thanks, Eric. It's the best introduction I've ever had.
I try. I do my best.
So, in that sort of that, continuing with that thought, a lot of people do know you, Jim. A lot of people do know your latest product, but give us a recap of measureQuick, what it is, what it intends to do, and where did the ideas come from?
Oh gosh, yeah, that honestly goes all the way back to iManifold and sort of pioneering some of the stuff we were doing with performance and diagnostics, right? It honestly goes back actually all the way back to Clear Result and Palm Pilots and Buck Taylor and all kinds of fun stuff there with Get Cool and I remember sitting down and sort of dreaming through what we could do when the iPhone came out. And gosh, we've been working on this for, I bet you it's 12 to 15 years now. At least we've been talking about it, and probably a solid 10 to 11 years we've actually had some product out there, whether it was iManifold was the first and now to measureQuick. But really the impetus of measureQuick was we had this really cool diagnostic performance technology that we wanted to be able to open up to everybody that had smart probes or smart tools, right? These tools were sort of a commodity at the time. They were just sort of taking what was on a display and reproducing it on your phone. And it was like, if we could take all these measurements, put them in real time, start to aggregate them, start to actually use them for performance calculations and leverage the power of a smartphone, a computer in your pocket to actually do some pretty complex calculations and diagnostics that we could like change the industry, but at the same time, sort of keep people out of our sandbox, because it was also about, if we built this, then the rest of the industry didn't have to focus on it. They could focus on the tools and test instruments. We could focus on the application side and and it's worked out pretty good. I mean, it's been an interesting journey, we got along the way.
So performance and diagnostic, who uses those features and why? I mean, aren't just measurements enough? Just numbers enough?
Well, this goes back to, and you should know this because I annoyed the heck out of you back in your testo days. I'm over there calling you every day when I worked as a vocational school teacher, telling you your psychrometers didn't work right because air conditioners removed humidity, and the humidity was actually going up in the ductwork. And it was like I was making measurements my entire career, and I had no idea what the measurement should be. I was a commercial industrial service technician, background 70 to 700 tons. And, this goes back to, Tesla was coming out with the first digital instruments. We were still at that time using a wet bulb thermometer and a sling psychrometer, and we would do things like measure humidity. But the idea of actually measuring humidity in the duct, that was sort of a new concept. We hadn't really done that before, and then measuring airflow, I'd never measured airflow, and I didn't realize how hard that was. I mean, I was out there with the kids in the lab, and I'm going, yeah, they're like, hey, if we could, calculate airflow with the sensible heat formula, if we could measure it, could we see how much the furnace is output? And I'm like, oh yeah, we can do that. And then I go out there and have my lunch handed to me because I didn't know, all these things about air density and pitot tubes and static pressure and just, flow that wasn't laminar. It was a huge, huge learning curve. Right. And so what I found out was, and you and I talked about this going back to when I was a high school teacher, is, man, we should make a book on measurement that explains that if you're going to make a measurement, you need to know what to expect before you actually make it. Right. It's like we make measurements, but if you have no expectation, like if you're go to a doctor's office and they measure your temperature and you're 104 degrees, and you walk out of there dead in a few hours, somebody's going to have a reasonable expectation that you should have been closer to 98.6 and you weren't. And yet we make measurements every day in the HVAC industry and, gauge up without realizing, well, what should our gauge pressures be before I hook up my gauges, or what should my humidity be in my duct before I measure it, or what should, whatever it is. It's just like, and that was really like, that was sort of the birth of measureQuick, was like, if we're going to make measurements, we're going to have targets. And then once we figured out, wow, we got these targets, what happens in aggregate when certain conditions or certain faults occur that impacts all of these different measurements? And then could we, aggregate those and do diagnostics? And it's just
sort of working backwards from the measurements to what causes the measurements, and also a context to place them in. I think you've done that very well with sort of like the graphical aspects of measureQuick.
Yeah.
Showing what those target ranges are, and you just communicate that really quickly. But you showed me something the other day. Is that out and released yet?
Yeah. We've sort of gone back to our roots. It's super challenging when you go to put a product onto market, because we have how we intended to be used, and then we have how people actually want to use it. Right. And we have two groups we're serving, because a lot of what I've tried to do with measureQuick, ongoing, has been to make the industry better, right? I always had this aspirations of helping people to make our industry better. And that was like the free piece of measureQuick. And then, but if you go back to and you look at what were these really designed for, they were designed for, utility programs like Clear Result and ICF and Franklin Energy's, the world where people were implementing utility programs. And they needed this financial grade data, right? They needed data that they could depend on, because they're using public money to pay for programs, and they got to have good data. And what we've found was, serving both groups at the same time and meeting everybody's needs was like a huge, huge challenge. And in the process, and I can't think of a better word to do this or to say this, we pissed a lot of people off, because we had to reel back some features that were undermining the core integrity of our product, right? Which was a screenshotting. And, so what was really, what happened in the last couple of months is we were actually able to file a provisional patent and come up with a solution by putting a geotag on that screenshot, so we can, know where it came from now. And that was the big problem, was we had some, you're always going to get some bad players out in the industry, and we were starting to notice that screenshots were being recycled. Right there, somebody was taking a screenshot of a vacuum gauge or a photo of a vacuum gauge, and we'd see it in 4 or 5 reports. And what's funny is like we had, just going back, we had an energy program that came back and said that our tool failed, and I was really ticked because it wasn't our tool that failed. It was the implementation of the tool. And then we realized, what, people aren't going to implement it properly. So we had to take steps to protect the integrity of the data. I mean, that's really, at the end of the day, why do we all do this? We all do it because we want to fix air conditioning problems, want to have high integrity. We want to have, the consumer, watched out for, make sure that the consumer's getting what they paid for. And we don't want people like using anything for evil. And that was just, and not that it was like this, evil, like killing somebody, but it was just, evil in the way of somebody was representing something that just wasn't true. And so it really sucked because we were not popular for about a year and a half, 2 years.
Yeah. I was thinking back to it. Like my memory says it switched on April 1st.
Yeah.
You had meant to switch it on May 1st. It switched on April 1st. And everybody thought, oh, this is a big April Fool joke.
Oh, I'm telling you, man, I actually had, it was so bad that I had physical, it affected me physically, just because I'm like the kind of people, I like to help the industry. I like to make people happy. And all of a sudden we were getting attacked from every angle on this. And but it goes back to, trying to serve everybody. And sometimes that's like, sometimes when you try and make everybody happy, you can't make anybody happy.
Yeah.
But what people don't understand is like apps aren't free. We have millions of dollars invested in this. We have hundreds of thousands of hours of programming time built into this thing. And it was like, because our core business is data integrity, we just had to stop till we could figure something out. And so the good news is we got it solved, right? And that's what this latest release is about, along with some other really cool features that I think will really, really help people that want to, use measureQuick faster. So
very nice. So when did that all come out?
So it's end of July 31st. It's rolled out. We have people that never like to update their software, so you may want to update it because you're going to get a lot of cool features back, like the screenshotting ability and the basic reporting ability. So those are coming back. But then we also have a really cool grid view. We had a customer that one time, and I have been searching, trying to figure out who this guy was, but he sent me like every single target on one screen on measureQuick. Like cut and paste in Photoshop. He's like, you need this. So I saved it to my camera roll, and I'm like, we came back and we're like, we made this grid view of measureQuick, following sort of that same concept that he had provided me. And the grid view just allows you to see like everything on one screen. So that's
That's what you like, Eric. You're one of those.
Yeah.
I've been bugging Jim about this since he first came out with iManifold. Like, I want to see it all on one screen.
Yeah. Well, it's all on one screen now, and it allows you to also, every measurement is a button. So, and the measurements have the high, low, normal indicator. So when you're looking at it, you get the measurement itself. You get whether it's, in range or out of range, if it's higher, if it's low. Then if you tap on it, it tells you what our calculated target is for it, as well as what the allowable range is. And then all that ties back into the diagnostics. And then from that same screen, you can profile, you can trend, you can do a lot of cool stuff. So it's like, it's a one screen version of measureQuick for all intents and purposes. It's so for me, what I found I'm doing, believe it or not, though, is I start out in a grid view, and then I end up going back to the target view when I have a diagnostic fault. Like I like to see how if things are a little bit out of range or way out of range, in the target zones really help me keep that in context. But I tend to always start with grid and then morph my way back over to targets when I have a fault. Yeah, but this also, what's cool with this is if you screenshot it, you can search by, depending on if you're in or out of a project, you can search either by geolocation or you can search by address. Because like on an iPhone, it actually does recognizes text in the screenshot. So if you are in a project and you screenshotted it, a lot of techs like to just have a documentation. When I was here, everything was right. And so if they typed, 3425, it's going to search all those screenshots, find the ones that are 3425, and then you could pull up that screenshot for that unit. So it also makes it much, much easier to find, screenshots of that you've saved in your camera roll.
Cool.
So Eric, why do you like seeing the grid view? What appeals to you there?
So when I think of measureQuick, I think of it as a data aggregator. I like to see all, and I've always wanted to see all that data in one place without having to flip between screens or jump around in things. Like, I want to see it all happening at the same time, because to me, that's the value of these tools, is that it's bringing data in from all over a system into one place. Because that was what I didn't like about having multiple tools before I had measureQuick. I had to go look at all these different tools that were placed all over a system, maybe try to write them down or remember them or something like that, if I had to do different calculations on them. And by the time I got all the numbers written down and everything looked at, it had changed again. And to me, that all in one screen, that is like the ultimate, hey, I can look at this and I can say, okay, now, as Jim said, okay, this area is out of range. Now I need to go focus on this area, but I'm looking at the kind of pulling way back and looking at the big picture, and then I can drill in to the areas that are out of range and do more work in those areas and more focus in those areas.
And we made a special, what's unique with measureQuick is, when I say all the measurements are on one screen, they're all visible on one screen without scrolling up and down too. So some of the other apps out there, they have everything on one screen, but you got to scroll up or down to see everything. Like, we built this really compact view that you can see everything on one screen. You can do one screenshot and get all the measurements on one screenshot. And so it's truly like a one screen user experience. And it's actually, to me, it's like really tailored around a smartphone, because a lot of techs use, a smartphone versus a tablet. I mean, I love the split screen views and tablet, but not everybody uses a tablet. I think probably most of our users use a smartphone. And then the other thing that's really cool is, I call it like a time to value. So like, we switched over with measureQuick. At the same time we reel back some of the screenshotting and stuff, we also were like, people need to be doing projects with us, and we want people to do more projects. So we really switched the user interface to more about the process that we were trying to teach. But a lot of our end users, they don't use it for the process. They use it for diagnostics or measurement or whatever. And so in this new tab view, whatever you open on is or whatever you close the app on is what it opens on. So if you use the grid view, it always opens on grid view. If you use the gauge view, it always opens on gauge view. If you use the project view, it always opens on project view. But it makes it very easy for you to use measureQuick the way that you want to use it now. And then primarily for new users, but even for existing users, we made a measureQuick like AI assistant. And it's not AI to help you solve your problem. It's AI to help you use measureQuick, because like, it drives me crazy. I'll see people with a photo of all of our gauges and they're like, what's wrong with this system? Help me out here. And I'm like, hit the dang flag in the corner. It'll tell you what's wrong. And they don't know that it's there. Right. So right now, when you download measureQuick, again, it opens on this grid view and it says, hey, do you want to hook up your tools? Right. Because that's the first thing we need, is you need to hook tools up to measureQuick to actually get measurements in. And then, what do you want to do? Do you want to just start working, or do you want to, what kind of a project do you want to do? And so it brings forward a lot of things that were not maybe evident to users, so that they can get a better initial user experience. Right. So we're really focusing on that initial user experience.
That's awesome. Yeah. And the other thing, and I've asked Jim for this for years, was it always bugged me that we were trying to go to digital tools, but yet there was still analog gauges on the screen. And Jim's like, no, we have to have analog gauges. And so I'm going to give you a big hug next time I see you, Jim. So you just better look out.
I think I can run faster scared than. So yeah, I still, well, I told you earlier, I still go back to that analog view, and it's because it's such a good visual representation of what's in and out of range and how far it's in and out of range. So I'm still a big analog fan when it comes to the visual representation of things versus a digital representation, because digits don't tell me if it's way out of range or close. It's like, and just because you're probably more of a data person, like you're a numbers person, and I'm a visual person. And I think, so if you're visual, just seeing what, like, I don't even look at the numbers sometimes, as I look, oh, that arrow's, it's in the red zone, and then I'll focus in on it versus saying it's at 400 pounds. My brain may not even, like, 400 pounds could be totally normal if it's 125 degrees in Arizona. Right. But if you're from Ohio, you look at it and go, holy cow, that head pressure's through the roof. Well, it's not for Arizona. Right. And that's where, like, I don't know, I just different things. But yeah, it goes back to, like, Erica's, like, the hard part is when you design something, you design it for you. Right. I really made measureQuick for me. And now it's
always thought that.
Yeah.
I always thought that.
Yeah. So now it's like, okay, well, I guess there's other people that use it too, so we should make it for them also. So
I threw into ChatGPT, what is measureQuick? You ever do that?
Oh, yeah, it probably comes back with, it's a data aggregation tool, measurement tool would be my guess, is what it would say.
Pretty close, but it highlights 6 features, and maybe if you gauge, like, which one of these is, which one of these are sort of off, or which one is perhaps the most underutilized.
Okay.
So integration with tools, I think you covered that already. That's the whole basis for it. Diagnostics and troubleshooting, you talked about that. Performance analysis, you talked about that. Data logging and reporting, user-friendly interface, and educational resources. Those last 3, maybe.
I would say by far the thing that measureQuick is used most for is diagnostics, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, overwhelming, like, we've done survey after survey, and people are like, I use it for the diagnostics. And that was that whole time to value. It's like, if people are having a problem, we wanted to make sure that they could get their tools hooked up and get a diagnostic within a few minutes of opening measureQuick. And when we were opening it on our project screens, people were opening up going, oh, what's this? I don't even know what this is. I don't want to, they didn't want to use it. Right. So I would say diagnostics is by far our most used feature. But then, you go back to, like, data logging. I think people think they want data logging, but I don't know of very many people that use it for data logging. And the reason is because you'd have to leave your probes hooked up and the tablet hooked up. I would say I use it more for trending. In other words, if I want to see as a TXV hunting, I'll look for trends, or I'll look, is my superheat falling or my subcooling increasing, or, like, what's the trend? When I think about data logging, I'm thinking about, like, a 24-hour period of letting a piece of equipment run and see if there's a fault. And I don't think, although we have that feature measureQuick now, I don't think that's like a heavily utilized feature. But the just-in-time education is like the most underutilized feature in measureQuick. And I think that's, again, something we're trying to bring forward with this AI bot, is to help people, like, understand that all these, and measureQuick, we always talk about, people are like, oh, you're dumbing down the industry. These technicians they're not going to learn anything. And it's like, okay, stop for a minute, because number one, it takes years and years and years to put all these problems together. And I don't care. I designed the software and I can't beat it. I mean, I cannot figure out things faster than the software.
That's what I was wondering. Has Frankenstein ever hammered on you?
Yeah. No, it's just, you can't do it, because as soon as the system's stable, the software knows what's wrong. And that would be the point at which I would start to figure out what's wrong. Right. But then it not only knows what's wrong, but people don't understand there's layers to it. Like first you tap the flag and you get the diagnostic, and then you tap the diagnostic and it tells you, what's the outcome of like what does a dirty condenser cause the system to do, right? And what does it do to your utility bill? And then, oh, by the way, here's how you clean this dirty condenser, right? We take the top off, we wash from the inside out, and we're gonna build that up. But then even things like like Brian Orr has done a ton of articles, and I'm trying to link as many as we can to HVAC school. Like people tap on compression ratio, like, well, what's compression ratio? I don't even know what that is, and it's like, what should it be? And why do we measure it? And we'll get people online that tell us, well, compression ratio should be 3.1 to 1, and it's like, okay, maybe under one set of load conditions, but it's changing all the time. What should it be under these load conditions versus those load conditions? And it's, and it's, so we provide that like just in time education that we can take people to the tech articles and the tech support and the things and make them aware and educate them as they go. And it's like, so it's not, my background's as a teacher, and I don't want to just tell people what's wrong. I want them to learn, why they want to fix it and then how to fix it. And then, but somebody like you need to know that when you have that question, when you have that fault, we could teach somebody in a textbook, but until they actually experience it, it's just, a bunch of blah, 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 blah words. It's when you actually got to, when you actually got to solve that issue, that you need somebody to, okay, now remember, this is what this fault causes, and this is why we want to fix it. And here's your talking points to your consumer. But here's the thing is that, measureQuick can identify faults, but it can't fix system problems. In other words, measureQuick can't wash a condenser coil, right? measureQuick can't take refrigerant out of the system or add refrigerant to the system. measureQuick can't fix a leak. measureQuick can't recover refrigerant and take care of non-condensables. That takes a technician to do that. But what we can do is get the technician pointed in the right direction to find the fault to actually generate additional revenue per ticket, which is like so important right now because we're in an economy where people can't afford to replace everything. And so are we going to leave thousands of dollars of revenue on the table because we can't fix it? I mean, and that's where some of these big companies, are struggling right now because they're great at selling, but they're not great at servicing. And, that's where we're trying to help them with these types of products to have a better solution.
Well, and I look at this kind of similarly, but I look at it from the fact that a tool like measureQuick, which I consider measureQuick a tool, it's a software-based tool, but it's still a tool. It would take the place of a graphing calculator in a higher math course or something like that. And people in those courses use a graphing calculator or something like that all the time. It's a tool that's doing work that as an industry, we were never great at doing in the first place. Most of the industry didn't do all that work in the first place. So now we have a tool here that is in the palm of our hand that we can easily access to do a lot of this work so that, as you said, we can more accurately communicate to the customer what's going on. We know what's happening in the system. The trending thing, I think, is amazing because as we look more and more at these systems, we find out that they're dynamic. They're not a fixed point. And we have focused for so long on just taking a set of fixed measurements and saying that the system is good. Well, in order for me, now that I look back at this, I look at this like I want to see a data trend of 15 to 20 minutes on a system to know whether it's operating properly. A single time point measurement, in my mind, is not good enough anymore because of what we see with the dynamics of a system and how it can start changing and fluctuating over a period of time.
No, and that's what people don't realize is like, I always tell somebody, how much cooling is an air conditioning doing the second the thermostat calls for cooling? It's doing none, right? And the fan starts up and it's effectively doing no cooling. But as soon as it starts to cool and the coil falls below the dew point temperature, now the wet bulb temperature in the space starts to change. And then if we're talking our superheat target starts to change and our capacity starts to change. And then it's like everything, that was the whole, like when we started with going back to iManifold and when we, back then it's like we learned more about air conditioning systems using that product in the first couple months that I learned about air conditioning my entire career, because I was able to see relationships in the data that I had never been able to experience before. And so, it's that whole being able to understand like what happens when you add refrigerant, what happens to your temperature split, your suction pressure, your head pressure, your superheat, your subcooling. And when you can focus on what's happening with the measurements versus the making the measurement itself or the calculation, for a young person, you start to see relationships much earlier in your career than you would see otherwise. Because initially, if you were to ask most people, what's superheat? Well, they tell you how to calculate it. And I'm like, no, what is it? Right.
What does it mean?
What does it mean? Yeah. What does it mean when you have number one, what is superheat? Now, what does it mean when superheat's high or low? And they're like, oh, well, you take the pressure, you convert it to saturation temp. It's like, no. And it's like, those are the things that when you get out of trade school, somebody knows how to do a calculation, but they don't know why. Elon Musk said this the other day. He's like, a big problem with schools is we tell students they're going to learn about calculus, but we don't tell them what calculus is actually used for. Right. Yeah. And I think that's the same thing in the air conditioning industry. We teach people how to measure superheat, but we don't really tell them, what it is and why we need to have it. I always tell, joke with people. I'm like, you should never be mad at me if I throw a 211 degree cup of coffee on your lap because it's subcooled liquid. Right. And that whole concept of just superheat and subcooling are above and below boiling, right? It's just like superheat's above the boiling point, subcooling is below the boiling point. Like you tell that in a classroom and people are like, oh, I never got that before. Right. And it's just,
and then you got to realize that boiling point moves up and down.
Yeah. And how do we control the boiling point? By controlling the pressure. And it's like, those are all things that once you start to like focus on the data and the software that you really start to learn. So it's because this industry is not without its challenges. And like I said, we've had a passion for educating people for a long time. And so hopefully these changes bring people sort of back to our roots and back to, I mean, like I said, it was very frustrating a couple of years ago, but it was a necessary thing. But now that we got, like I said, we have the geotagging on there, it makes the data quality much higher again. So we're going to be able to do, we're able to do what we want to do. And that's, educate the industry and provide people with a tool that can make their jobs better and easier. So it is all fun.
So, in seeing more visibility from team members of yours, it seems like you built the organization out. I know you've done that over time, but talk about some of the people you got working for you. What they're doing.
Well, that was another necessary evil. I found out in October I had cancer and I had to go through 6 months of chemotherapy. And so I decided at that point I was going to delegate a lot of things. And so Valerie, she's obviously been VP of the operation for a couple of years now, but she really took over a lot of our contracts and a lot of customer, working with customers and that kind of stuff. But then Joe took over a lot of the training, and Ben Reed's taken over a lot of our marketing. And so things where I was the face of the company now, I'm not quite as much of the face. We have a lot more faces that are doing a lot more things. And when I came back, I'm like, you know what? I'm not going to take these things back over. We have people that have shown that they can do these jobs, and it's more important for me to be in front of working on the design side and working on the testing side and working on I'm obviously still face the company, but I mean, it was like we had a team of people that actually, I mean, we didn't lose a step. We're 6 months, I was sort of out, and we didn't lose a step, so it was really good. And I didn't want to do anything to change that dynamic because it proved it could work, right? And so I would say, I would say it was a little bit of a learning experience, but it was more something I was forced to do than I thought of, right? But it had really good it's had really good results.
Yeah, sometimes people say things happen for a reason, and or multiple reasons. We'll put it that way.
Yep. So it's been good though, and we're I've been back for I don't know, maybe about 10 weeks now. And I've been trying to, I always enjoy doing videos and trying to do training and things online. So I've been trying to really have a little bit more of a social media presence, and that's been good. It's it's creating some conversation and getting people engaged and getting them engaged with the brand and creating some interest.
Speaking of, getting engaged, I saw something called a masterclass that you did recently.
Oh,
Can you
yeah.
talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so that was Joe really wanted me to do that class, because every time we'd have a measureQuick class, I would start talking about things and look in the crowd. If you teach, you can read your audience, and I'm like, oh, they don't understand what I'm talking about. So I would get off into the fundamentals, because everybody struggles with like we've taught mechanics in our industry. We've taught people how to do ductwork, how to attach a line set, how to braze, how to solder, how to do a thermostat, how to do all this stuff. But we didn't teach them the science behind what we do. We didn't teach them the difference between temperature and BTUs. We didn't teach specific heat, latent heat, sensible heat transfer. And so, all this stuff, Joe's like, he would get frustrated with me because I'm going into the fundamentals. And then he's like, people aren't getting a chance to touch measureQuick. And so this class was like, I think he finally agreed with me that at one point people need the fundamentals. So we actually did a fundamentals course. Only opened up to 10 people. We bought textbooks for them, the original refrigeration, air conditioning technology textbook. We spent time in chapters 1, 2, and 3, which are like the science behind what we did. And then typical operating conditions, which was sort of the groundwork that was laid out for measureQuick, right? And showed them how all that science ties back into the software, and then like where those calculations come from, how the difference between standard error equations and regular equations. And it was interesting because we had a group, I don't know if you know Thomas Huffmeyer. Huff is like, he was a Carrier tech support rep, right? So he had people with like 30 years of experience plus, down to, we had a lady in the class that she was in the home performance market, never had touched an air conditioner before in her life. And so we had a eclectic group of people, but it was everybody got a lot out of the class. They really enjoyed the class because it filled a lot of holes in people's understanding. And that for me, like when I was an instructor, going back to like when you met me, Bill, that's sort of what got me excited about this industry. Was I all of a sudden learned the fundamentals, and all these holes I had in my education were suddenly filled, and things started to actually make sense. Right. So a big challenge with the HVAC industry is technicians. If we don't know, we just make up our own reason and then we believe it. And then until something makes us think otherwise, right?
There's a term for it. It's something like recency bias or something like that. There's a psychological term. You see something enough, and then you just believe that's the fact because you've experienced it enough.
Yeah. It sounds like our political climate today in a nutshell.
Maybe that's where I was reading it. So back on the masterclass, are you going to do this again?
Yeah, we'll probably do another one this fall.
Okay.
It was those classes, believe it or not, they take a lot out of you when they're doing.
Sure.
I was doing three 8-hour days of this, and so it was coming back. I mean, I hadn't done any teaching since I had been out in October, so it was the first time in front of a class in a little while. But yeah, I think we're gonna do them again because people want them, people need them. The people that really should be coming to these courses are HVAC instructors, especially new instructors that are coming out of the field that aren't well grounded in fundamentals. And I always talk about this. We need to make mechanics into technicians. And what I mean by that, mechanics are people that solve problems with tools, right? Capacitor goes out, they can change a capacitor. They can physically see the capacitors failed, and they know that, they got to put a new one in. But they may have no clue how a capacitor works or what it does, right? I mean, they're calling it a voltage conditioner or God knows what else they name it, but battery, it acts like a battery or it does this or that. And it's like they don't understand the fundamentals like what we do in the industry. And once you, like, if you're a good mechanic and then all of a sudden you actually start doing two things. Number one, understand the fundamentals, but then leveraging technology, and you actually become a good technician. So think of an auto mechanic, the guy that works in your brakes, an auto technician, the guy that plugs into the OBD2 port and actually runs a diagnostic on your car. measureQuick's a diagnostic tool. And so when we plug in these probes, like your car's got built-in sensors, but your air conditioner, we're just going to put probes on temporarily, and then we're going to run a diagnostic with measureQuick that's going to really help you to better understand how that system's performing, so just a different mindset. And I have personal experience with this because Bill, I mean, you knew me back when I was a great mechanic.
Yep.
And you sort of saw my whole transition to being a technician. I mean, you were, and I think Eric, you go, all of us go back all the way to HVAC ProTech days. We were all learning at the same time and feeding off each other. I mean, that group, Robert Lee, Doug Lockhart, there's a whole group of people that were sort of a lot of conversations, a lot of interesting stuff going on at the time. But I think there's a small group of us, probably 15 to 20 people that were all bringing each other up together, ticking each other off periodically. But some of us ticking people off more than others. Yeah, but that was an awesome group of people. But you think about the conversations and the things that we learned in that group at that time. And a lot of it was just test instrumentation was starting to become like really good. We were able to make measurements we'd never made before, specifically airflow, temperature, relative humidity. I mean, those were the game changers.
Yeah. I remember there was a lot of tools that went through that group that we looked at and evaluated. I still have my, what was it? Cooper Atkins made that MFM 300 multi-tool.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, wow.
With all the different sensors that you could plug into that. I carried that around for years.
Yeah.
Still have 2 of them sitting out here on my shelf.
Yeah, right next to your Simpson analog meter behind you.
Yeah, right in the corner there.
That's why it sets over there and that one doesn't get used anymore. Still works.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So purpose of the podcast, communicate something new, late breaking, grab some of your insights, talk to an icon really as you become in this industry. I think we accomplished that today. And big takeaways, measureQuick continues to change and adapt. It has multiple purposes and you're addressing more and more every day. And the big thing is screenshots are back because you're able to figure out how to please several groups of people at the same time. So
Yep. Well,
kudos on doing that.
Well, thanks. Yeah, thanks for having me on the podcast, and it was good to talk to you guys. And we're gonna keep at it. So, if you're a measureQuick user, don't forget to update because you'll be happy that you did.
And if you're around the next time I see Jim, just look for Jim running, and I'll be chasing him to give him a big hug.
Yeah,
he's being chased by an elk.
Yeah. All right. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, guys. Yep.
Thanks.
Bye. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Building HVAC Science Podcast, where we brought on board today Jim Bergmann to talk about measureQuick's evolution. The Building HVAC Science Podcast is a production of TruTech Tools Limited. In full disclosure, I'm a co-owner of TruTech. Any opinions voiced are those of my guests, my co-host, or myself, depending on who is speaking, of course. And if you're in the market for tools or test instruments mentioned in our podcast, now we didn't mention a lot in this, but we do offer all the tools that connect to measureQuick. And there's actually a link in the show notes right to that page, but you can look at TruTechTools.com, TruTechTools.com, and just type in measureQuick or look under brands measureQuick, or just look at the different products. They actually have a badge on them when they're measureQuick compatible. And you can use the offer code HVACBS for a nice discount. I want to thank you for listening to this podcast. Please consider subscribing and or sharing the podcast with others. We hope to continue to bring you some late-breaking news and thoughtful insights into the world of HVAC and building performance. Until next time, take care.